I heard her before I saw her, a slow, unsteady breath coming through the gap in a fire door that had no business being open at that hour, while a company gala played on 50 feet away, and no one seemed to notice that the most important person in the room had disappeared. I almost kept walking. That instinct lasted exactly 2 seconds, then something. I still don't know what to call it. Call it stubbornness. Call it the particular recklessness that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. Pushed me back toward that door. I put my hand on it. I pushed it open, and I stepped through into a concrete stairwell and found my boss sitting on the second step, alone, with her phone in her lap, and her eyes red in the quiet, unflinching way that told me she had been crying for a while before anyone noticed. My name is Jake Morrow. I'm from Terre, Haute, Indiana, which is the kind of place people from Chicago have technically heard of, but have never had a reason to think about twice. My dad worked maintenance at a hospital until his back gave out, and then he worked somewhere smaller. My mom did customer service for an insurance company from a desk in the corner of our living room, and I grew up doing homework at the kitchen table while I could hear her apologizing to strangers on the phone for things that were not her fault. We were not poor in the way that gets written about. We were poor in the ordinary, tireless way, where you're never in crisis exactly, but you're always 3 things away from one. I was not supposed to end up working on the 32nd floor of a building in the Chicago Loop. I knew that. I had known it since I was 17, and a guidance counselor told me I was a good candidate for a state school with a practical major, which is what people say when they've already decided your ceiling, and they're trying to be kind about it. I went to Indiana State on a partial scholarship and a lot of ramen, graduated with a finance degree and a GPA that wasn't going to open doors on its own, and spent 14 months after graduation sending out applications before Meridian Capital Group sent me an offer letter that I read 4 times because I was convinced there was a mistake. There was no mistake. I started in January. By February, I understood that getting the job was the easy part. Cynthia Rourke was Meridian's Senior Vice President of Client Relations. She had been at the firm for 19 years, had personally managed or overseen the cultivation of its largest institutional accounts, and had a reputation that was communicated to every new hire through a specific combination of tone and word choice that, translated plainly, meant, "She is brilliant, she is exacting, and she will make you feel small without ever meaning to, and sometimes while meaning to." The first time she reviewed a portfolio summary I'd prepared, she returned it with 14 inline comments, none of them complimentary, and a 2-sentence email that read, "This needs to be reworked before it goes anywhere near a client. Let's talk about precision." I revised it twice. The third version she accepted without a word, which I eventually learned to interpret as the highest available form of praise. She rarely addressed me directly. Her emails were brief, functional, and absent of anything resembling warmth. When I presented in team meetings, she watched me from across the table with an expression I couldn't decode. Not hostile, not approving, somewhere in a register I didn't have a name for. I kept my head down. I worked harder than I had worked at anything in my life. I told myself that this was what excellence looked like from the outside, and that eventually the distance would close. It didn't close. 8 months in, it felt wider. By late October, I was staying until 8 or 9 most nights, not because the work demanded it, but because the office was the only place I could think, without the low hum of a question I'd been avoiding answering. The question was simple: was I wrong to believe I could do this? I drafted the resignation letter on a Wednesday afternoon. I typed it carefully, the way you type something when you want it to mean something, addressed it to HR, kept it professional, thanked him for the opportunity. Then I saved it, printed it on the 4th floor printer, and walked back upstairs to grab my jacket for the shuttle to the company gala. And I forgot to pick it up. I didn't think about that printout again until I was standing in that stairwell looking at my boss. The Langham Hotel's grand ballroom was the kind of room that made you feel, briefly, like you had arrived somewhere. Crystal chandeliers above polished floors, round tables with white linens and low centerpieces. A jazz quartet doing something understated to a standard I almost recognized. Meridian Capital's annual Client Appreciation Gala was the event the firm used to remind its clients, and perhaps itself, that it was the kind of institution worth trusting with serious money. Every detail was calibrated. Even the silence between songs felt deliberate. Cynthia had arrived at 8 sharp. She always arrived exactly when she was supposed to. She wore a dark navy dress and small stud earrings, and she moved through the room the way she moved through everything. Purposefully, without wasted motion. I watched her from a distance for a few minutes, not because I was paying attention to her specifically, but because she was the kind of person that rooms organized themselves around, and it was hard not to notice. She was at one of the client tables by 8:15, then briefly at the bar. Water, not wine. Then in conversation near the entrance with two senior partners. Then somewhere around 9 o'clock, somewhere between the main course being cleared and the dessert plates coming out, she was gone. I noticed because the room felt different without her, which I recognized even then as a strange thing to notice. I told myself I was just looking for the restrooms and headed toward the back corridor. The fire door to the east stairwell was ajar. Through the gap, I heard it. That slow, unsteady breath. The kind people make when they've been holding something in for so long that the holding is starting to cost more than they have. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. She looked up at me. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The sound from the ballroom dimmed behind the door. The stairwell was fluorescent and concrete and completely wrong for whatever was happening in it. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to. Are you okay?" She looked at me the way you look at something you weren't expecting to see. Then she looked away. "I'm fine." I didn't leave. I don't know how to explain why, except that I'd spent 8 months learning to read her silences, and this one was saying something specific. I sat down on the step beside her and looked at the opposite wall. I didn't say anything else. I just stayed. If you've ever stayed somewhere when you didn't have to, you know there's a specific quality to that kind of silence. It's not comfortable, but it's not nothing either. It's the silence that says, "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to perform for me. Take whatever time you need." Before I tell you what happened next, before we get to the part of this story that changed everything for me, I'd like to ask something of you. If a story like this has ever found you at the right moment, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Mercy Stories. Every story on this channel is about ordinary people who made the quiet choice to stay, to listen, to show up when the easier thing would have been to walk away. Your support is what makes it possible to keep sharing them. Now, back to that stairwell. After a couple of minutes, she spoke. "We lost Pemberton this evening," she said. The name landed in that stairwell like something physical. At Meridian, you didn't have to be senior staff to understand what Pemberton Family Investments meant. 11 years, $247 million in assets under management. The flagship account that had anchored the firm through the 2008 aftermath, through the pandemic shutdowns, through 2 restructurings and 1 near merger. It was not simply a client. It was, in many ways, a cornerstone of the firm's identity, and of Cynthia's. "Gerald Pemberton called me at 8:45, she said. "They're moving the account effective January 1st. She paused. He was gracious about it. The word gracious carried its own particular weight. The word people use when they're delivering something devastating and want to acknowledge that they know exactly what they're doing. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's business." She said it the way people say things they've repeated to themselves so many times the words have worn smooth. Then more quietly, 11 years. I didn't try to fill that silence. Some things don't need a response. They need a witness. I sat there thinking about what she was actually holding. The board would want a review. Senior partners would start having private conversations. Other clients would hear through the industry, because accounts that size don't move quietly. And Cynthia would be the one standing in the middle of all of it. The one people look to for the explanation, the plan, the reassurance, the way they always did. I had spent 8 months believing she was difficult because she wanted to be. That the coldness was a choice she'd made and was comfortable with. But sitting in that stairwell, watching her hold herself together on a concrete step while a party played 50 feet away, I saw something I hadn't seen before. That the person who always handled everything was, in this moment, not handling anything. She was just sitting with it, alone. The way she had apparently been doing, I was starting to understand for a very long time. The shift I felt wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happens when something you've been looking at from one angle for too long suddenly reveals a different face. She turned toward me slightly. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen before, or hadn't known to look for. I found something this afternoon, she said. Before I came here, I went still. On the fourth floor printer, someone had left a document in the tray. A pause. It had your name in the header. The stairwell was very quiet. I wasn't trying to read it, she said, but I read enough. I looked at the floor. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. How long have you been thinking about leaving? She asked. A few weeks, I said. I kept going back and forth. She nodded slowly. Can I ask what decided it? I could have said something careful. I had gotten good at careful. 8 months of learning to frame everything precisely under her watch had left me fluent in the language of saying nothing with a lot of words. But sitting on that step, with her red eyes and my unsubmitted resignation letter between us, and everything already stripped down to its plainest form, careful felt like a waste of the only real conversation we'd ever had. I stopped believing I was good enough, I said. I kept thinking I was one revision away from meeting your standard, and then there'd be another revision. And after a while, I couldn't tell anymore if I was getting better, or if I'd just been wrong about myself from the beginning. It got hard to come in every day not knowing which one it was. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face, quick, controlled, but real. I owe you an explanation, she said. One I should have given you months ago. I waited. I run a demanding team. That's a choice I've made, and I stand by it. The work we do requires exactness, and I don't apologize for expecting it. She paused. But I have a habit, a bad one, of reserving my hardest feedback for the people I'm most invested in, the ones I think can actually handle it, the ones I think are going somewhere. She paused again. I assumed you knew that's what it meant. I never said it plainly, and that was wrong. I sat with that for a moment. Something in my chest shifted. Some calcification I hadn't known was there. I've been in this industry for 22 years, she said. Most of the best analysts I know almost quit before they found their footing. Not because they couldn't do the work, because the work is relentless and this industry is relentless, and without someone telling you that you're worth the effort, eventually you stop being able to tell yourself. She looked at me directly. You are worth the effort, Jake. You have been since March. I just never told you. 8 months of that. 8 months of assuming the worst, of staying late in an empty office running numbers, and wondering if the problem was me. And there it was, said plainly, in a hotel stairwell while the jazz quartet played on and no one noticed we were gone. The way you work through a problem, she continued, the connections you make across datasets that other analysts walk right past, your instinct for what a client actually needs versus what they think they want. I've watched all of it this year. I've been harder on your work than anyone else's because I believed you could do something exceptional with it, and I wanted to push you there. She paused. I handled that badly, I can say that now. I didn't know what to do with any of it in real time. I just held it. Don't submit the letter, she said. It came out quieter than anything she'd said to me all year. Something different, softer than that, and somehow more serious. I know I'm not in a position to ask you for anything, but I'm asking anyway. She looked at me. This firm needs people who still care about doing the work right. And right now, in about 40 minutes, I'm going to walk back into that ballroom, and I'm going to spend the rest of the evening pretending that phone call didn't happen, because that's what the situation requires, and I would. She stopped. She looked away. I would rather do that knowing you're still here. That was when I understood something that had been standing at the edge of my thinking for a long time, waiting for me to look directly at it. Strength that never asks for anything is not strength without limits. It's strength with limits that no one knows about, including sometimes the person carrying it. Cynthia had built her entire professional life around being the one with the answers, the one who could absorb whatever the market or the board or the client decided to throw at her and come out the other side standing. And she had done it, year after year, while the cost of that accumulated quietly in places where she kept herself alone. I thought about my mom at the customer service desk in our living room, apologizing for other people's problems hour after hour, never complaining, never asking anyone to cover for her, because she had decided somewhere along the way that asking wasn't something she did. I thought about how long it had taken me to understand that strength and silence are not the same thing. Okay, I said, I won't submit it. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once. The way people nod when they're trying very hard, not to let you see how much they needed the answer they just received. We walked back into the ballroom separately about 8 minutes apart. I don't know if anyone noticed either of us had been gone. The jazz quartet was still playing. The dessert course had arrived in our absence. Small chocolate tarts arranged with a precision that, under the circumstances, felt faintly absurd. Cynthia was at the head table within minutes, composed and deliberate and professional, saying something to a client that made him laugh. I stood at the far edge of the room and watched her and tried to reconcile the two versions of the same person I'd seen in the same evening into something coherent. I'm not sure I managed it that night. What came next was the most difficult stretch in the firm's recent history. The Pemberton account's departure was announced internally in early December. The months that followed involved the kind of institutional reckoning that no one enjoys being inside. Board reviews, departmental audits, senior partner meetings that ran past 7 on weeknights. A trade publication ran 4 paragraphs on it, which was enough to land on clients' desks and prompt phone calls. For a stretch in January, the whole firm felt like it was deciding what it was going to be when it came out the other side. But something else was happening in parallel, smaller and harder to chart on any report. Cynthia began running Monday morning check-ins with the team. 15 minutes, standing in the conference room, where she'd go around the table and ask what each person was working on and what they needed to get it done. She started saying thank you in ways that registered. She started acknowledging occasionally and without fanfare when the workload had been heavy and people had stepped up anyway. The changes were small. She was still demanding. She still sent work back with comments. She still got quiet in the particular way that meant she was unhappy with what she was seeing. But something different was woven into it now, something that hadn't been there before. In February, she stopped by my desk after a weekend I'd spent working through a client retention analysis she'd requested. She looked at my screen for a moment, then at me. "This is excellent work," she said. "I mean it." She kept walking. The conversation lasted maybe 8 seconds. But I thought about it for the rest of the day. I thought about what those 8 seconds would have meant to me in March, in May, in September. Every month I'd spent running on near empty, wondering if I was even running in the right direction. By the following fall, Meridian had brought on 6 new institutional clients. 4 of them came through a prospecting framework Cynthia had built directly from the aftermath of the Pemberton loss, a restructuring of how the firm positioned itself to a segment of the market it had previously underserved. It was not the outcome anyone had predicted when the worst of it was happening. It was, in most of the ways that matter, better. In October, she called me into her office and offered me a promotion to senior analyst. The meeting was about 4 minutes long. At the end of it, as I was standing up to leave, she said, "You stayed when it would have been easier to go. That's not something I forget." Then she told me to close the door on my way out. I think about that night in the stairwell more than I expected to when it was actually happening. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. Not really. 2 people in a concrete box with fluorescent light and the muffled sound of a party neither of us was fully present for. No speeches, no resolution, just someone sitting down when they could have walked away, and someone else deciding to be honest about something they'd been carrying alone for too long. I think about it because of what it taught me about the distance between being strong and being alone. Cynthia had built something extraordinary over 22 years, and she had built most of it in isolation, absorbing every hard thing, solving every problem before anyone else saw it, asking for nothing and receiving nothing because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that asking and receiving were things she didn't need. She was wrong about that. I don't think she'd argue the point now. And I think about what I almost did. I almost walked away from the job, from the city, from everything I'd worked for, because no one had told me I was worth staying for, and because I'd decided quietly, without examining it, that the silence meant I wasn't. The silence wasn't an answer. It was just silence. And the resignation letter on that printer tray was me letting silence win. If someone in your life is quiet in the way that looks like strength, it might be worth asking if they're okay. Not because they'll always say yes, not because they'll always tell you the truth the first time you ask, but because the asking is something. Because showing up when you don't have to, pushing open a door that's already slightly ajar, sometimes that's the whole thing. The smallest acts are the ones that stay with you the longest. And sometimes they stay with the other person too, in ways you'll never fully know.